Well, how are you?
Okay.
There she is, Amanda.
Well,
Hello.
for today, I want to, last week was a pretty all over the place meeting, and that's fine. I'm kind of just picking up the pieces. This week, I'm a little bit more structured for what I want to do. I don't think it's going to be, I don't feel like we're going to make any major discoveries in what we're doing, but I think let's just revisit something and just go and do it, because I think that'll be, good to do. I think this is being shared here. Yeah. So kind of on my general list of stuff for right now is, we can do general updates and things like that. My update is, there's been some Cognition Futures stuff going on. It's just been, there's more to do, I'll put it that way. Things are starting with grad school again, which is good. I actually really, I know this is a little bit of a deep cut, but I want to share this just because it's here. I actually really enjoyed this. Actually, it's always better if I do it this way. So just a second. I don't know why, but the way the left nav opens on Notion for me always gets really annoying sometimes, and I find it better to just try it like this. But there was something in this. I was at a really, it's an intro course for machine learning fundamentals. It's not anything super crazy so far, but I really liked how the professor got into the history of things, the way he spoke about the history, even just framing it. I know I'm like Mr. Cognition Futures guy, and trajectories and stuff like that, but it was quite relevant. And there's a quote here in, I think I put it in Slack, that I just want to highlight. I'll copy it in the Notion so we can talk about a little bit easier. But it reminds me of a lot of things that we kind of talked about in terms of like the Norbert Weiner group, and it was basically he was talking about the different kinds of data, and you can't really see here, but this basically says, we have better computing power, we have a whole lot more data, and then what's this last bit say? New models, and connecting different fields and developing like machine learning theory. So kind of, your general stuff. But I'll just put this here too, or not. But the quote, he said, he tucked it in at the end of the data part, was that so much of our data lambs are now mediated by computational devices and therefore become data. And I think it's quite an interesting thing to unpack and think about in the context of what we talked about, in the sense that the medium itself is generating this data by engaging with it. There's explicit, by how it's constructed, the choices are made explicit. Is it a 0 or is it a 1 in one sense? And I feel like that's a really interesting way to think about a lot of things, in the sense of what is data that hasn't been actionable, and what are mediums that do or do not generate this sort of explicit choices. And we don't have to go into that, but I really enjoyed how it came up, because it was so organic, and then it was just this sentence, and it's like, yeah, there's a lot in that. So more about that later, perhaps. Jen is doing a lot of cool things with the DSM project for the JoPro thing, and I find the DSM to be quite related to a lot of things we're doing. This was just I think this is a history I pulled from like GPT 3.5, but Jen's looking at a couple other articles here and kind of taking from that, going from there. So we'll go into that now, but just kind of want to say that's happening too. And I find it to be a really it's a good it's a nice thing that's happening there. So and then also just to plug this, after Saturday's meeting, I basically drafted out a very simple what is orthogonal lab, almost like a more conversational piece to introduce what we're doing here, maybe. And you know, it's incomplete and unreviewed, but I asked some people for like testimonies, or like, you know, it'll be anonymous if anything happens that way at all, but just kind of like to give a sense of flavor of what actually is going on here, because I know we had someone visit the lab and it just triggered like, yeah, like my neural mates, I've always thought about a neural mate as like just as an intermotor, just write this now and get it there. So probably one of the least important things on the list. So it was fun to procrastinate on doing something not as super important as all these other things we're about to talk about. But it happened, and you know, that'll be a fun thing, and hopefully a useful thing to come up. A lot of people are interested in joining the lab and doing some in the lab soon, so maybe we'll help with that too. That's my brief update. You guys want to share anything before we dive into project stuff? Okay. Cool. So last week, this is the 69th meeting. Last week we had a bumbling tour through our previous stuff and a couple Slack items and things like that. But I spent most of our time on this space of the some notes. Is it kind of just, let's say, some discussion notes on this process, and we don't have a position paper yet. But we went through this stuff. We kind of wanted, we didn't do it last week, and I wanted to do it this week and look at these specific things, these sort of structures that we made. We go through the paper pyramid. We talked about this stuff. We discussed our time in phenomenology, and then we kind of got to some more meatier things about this, what we're doing, paper or post, and then specifically talking about our evaluation lenses, which I thought was a really nice discussion. I want to return to that today. We're kind of getting towards the MIC, the mutually informed constraints. Does it afford the dialogue between first person and third person? What does that look like? We talked about formalizability, formalizing things. How do we bring into you know, philosophical, mathematical stuff, and and these things. And a lot of this question actually reminds me. I'll go back to this here. Maybe I can just copy this. Be a little bit easier this way. But a lot of it reminds me of you know, what was getting at here with this stuff. But like, even in the intro, it was sort of part of what happened to evolve the discipline of machine learning, according to this very brief intro video, was these models were developed, the actual, you know, learning algorithm, the tools, and connections to other more established fields like information theory or statistics, and then developing the theory work in the field. And it's like, okay, I think it would be really interesting and and quite incomplete, which is actually what's intriguing to me about it, is that the development of machine learning, and he kind of started off by saying, oh yeah, like machine learning, which I think he says like, oh, originally it's like pattern recognition, and people didn't really think that this version of AI a long time ago, like probably in like the Minsky era, was like, oh yeah, they were kind of not sure about it, but this is well before the big deep learning explosion. So I think it'd be really fun to compare. I'm not saying we should do this, but just because it's on my mind here, or do this in the context of the evaluatory lens. But I think it might be useful for us to or at least I'm curious to sort of compare and contrast the development of machine learning to, I guess I'll say cognitive science, but more so knowing that the comparison is not not really that good, and why it's not very good is actually more interesting to me than why it might be a good comparison. Like why is it a good bad example, and what are the differences? Even in terms of, you have this medium that has so much built off of it that has these implicit choice structures in it, or in the Norbert Wiener sense of the transmission of information is impossible, save for a transmission of alternatives. Like, you have the alternatives built in to the medium that these other things are built on, and you have data generated from it. And I feel like that's such a different, like, I think cognitive science in the computer is the brain analogy. You know, there's sort of this almost like the computation envy, if there's such a thing, like almost like a physics envy I'm kind of drawing on, but like a computation envy of, oh yeah, we can't wait to get to a place where we can have such a thing where we have this sort of computational constant data output, and you know, is doing this work on neuro data. You know, how does it compare and contrast to that? And I kind of think a little bit about the, you know, other papers like Cording's, you know, can a neuroscientist understand a microprocessor or whatever, like those things that are trying to bridge that stuff too. So anyway, this is a little bit tangential, but I think it might be a nice juxtaposition to do some of these other things against, or have in the mind as a sort of a motivational contrast, because I don't, you know, I think you know how I feel about it, and I'll move on from there. So anyway, anything about all that, or anything at all in general before we dive in? I'm going to go through these things a little bit, but anything before we go into this part of the discussion, I guess.
My first thought, if I'm understanding you correctly, on like why AI and machine learning has been so successful by some standards, and why cognitive science has maybe been unsuccessful by some standards. My first thought is that we judge the success of AI or of machine learning by like the usability of its output, but cognitive science as a science, it's supposed to be judged by like the truth of its output. That's much more difficult than just developing tools that do impressive things. And I don't know, maybe I don't know enough. I'm struggling to think of examples, but it just seems like AI and machine learning aren't really in the business of discovering truths about anything. It's like the development of tools, and that's just a completely different task. So I think that comes into play when in this comparison. That seems like a pretty key difference. And yes, science is also judged by how useful that its outputs are, but that's not its ultimate goal.
So a little bit of basic versus applied research kind of stuff, or is it like even research versus just engineering and applications? I think that's a really important differentiation, and I think like you can really take obvious examples of like GTP3, you know, and 4 and beyond, and it is not a truth dispenser. You know, it's a kind of ad lib for sentences that make sense and have some facts and can be great and can generate, you know, the big thing at this is all the week of consumer electronics show, CES, literally consumer electronics, and when everything's coming out, like games and computers and translucent TV screens and remote control cars and biometric stuff and wearables and all that stuff. And, everything has AI in it now. AI now being some kind of prediction thing or some machine learning application for classifying or vision or GTP and it's, now you have our bot, you can talk our GTP enhanced whatever. What is success? And I think that's a great, I think low key, like a lot of when we talk about the manifesto project and these bigger things and kind of some of the deeper things of the lab is sort of what is success? What is the framing of success that's sort of steering the discussion that you want to while remaining viable? It's sort of like the trade-off between the established ways of doing things and success in that established path versus, what would a successful interdisciplinary effort like the cognitive science approach look like with a different lens of success? Because there's no cognitive science clearinghouse, right? Maybe there are certain institutions that publish the handbooks and all that stuff, but there isn't necessarily a direction of there's no one shaping the flow of it. And it's different because I think that's quite a related point to the development and success of machine learning in that sense, because it's the medium it's generating, using the things of that field generate data in the way that data is talked about there, but it's also, as Amanda said, I guess, some of the aims of it are very different in terms of developing a theory that reflects reality versus a theory that can do stuff. And how much you need to know about it. Black boxes are still a thing, so yeah. Anyway, hi Morgan, welcome. I'm warming up for administratively focused meeting somewhat, but I had a discussion about some things. So I don't know if you wanted to share any general comments before we begin. Or Amanda, if you wanted to continue, sorry.
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay. So we were kind of I was just teasing a little bit of some cool things that happened at an intro for a course, and I thought it'd be interesting to kind of compare the development of specifically machine learning and how cognitive science or psychology, or maybe even psychiatry has developed as a case that it's a hard comparison to make, and why it's a hard comparison and why they're different. And we had a discussion about even is it an engineering or implementation arena versus doing the science and the theory work and so on. Anyway,
psychiatry, I guess to add, psychiatry, unlike cognitive science in general, it is focused on the implementation and actually bettering people's lives. So that one can be judged by this by a different standard of success, which is how well it works for the individuals that engage with the system. And that's difficult because you have the system there, it involves all these social forces in addition to the science. So that was good in its own way.
As has come up a couple times during this conference at JPM Healthcare, psychiatry is the only discipline where Nobel Prizes haven't exactly been retracted, but let's just say that the Nobel Prize Committee would rather we forget particular years for the prize in medicine. Yeah. It's this weird thing, like you said, it should have clear metrics in terms of is psychiatry working? But I think that's why Mind Fixers is such an interesting read. I think just because you can kind of decade by decade you can see how the metrics got kind of what's the word when a company takes over an issue?
Merged or consolidated?
Not merged. I mean, but like they control the narrative about
Monopoly, yeah.
Not so much that. It's sort of like greenwashing. You know,
Yeah.
it's like you put up a false. You know, it's yeah. Anyway. Yeah. That's as recently as I think Insel, the former head of NIMH, said, you know, like, we haven't actually changed anything in terms of homelessness. We haven't changed anything in terms of suicide rates. You know, in some cases, things have actually gotten worse. So yeah,
I think that's actually super on point and super, like, I don't want to linger there too much, but I do think it's sort of like painfully relevant to everything about this here. Like, we're talking about, when we talk about phenomenology and mutually informed constraints, like the part of the reason why, like I use this, I'm going to keep going back to this quote because I really like it, but during the introduction for this course, it's very simple. It's just fundamentals. It's super. There's the intro video. It's not anything amazing. It's not anything I've heard before. But I really appreciate this sentence about talking about, oh, now that we have more data, machine learning is more powerful. You know, very general. But there was this line saying, so much of our daily lives is now mediated by computational devices, and therefore becomes data. And I feel like, in the context of what we just said, we're dealing with this huge, like, inertia of, there's sort of external stuff that you can at least really explicitly see how something is happening in the choosing or not choosing of it happening. Like when you have something that's like fairly computationally explicit, and I'm sure there's really good terms for this that I don't know yet, but like when you have something that's computationally explicit and made from a sort of lens that's accessible to understanding the differences that create the data of the choices about, are you going here or there? Is it a yes or no in this specific way? It's different because this stuff doesn't deal with the messy internal stuff of inside the human being, and it goes all the way back to our talks about like reductionism and the whole, you know, sense of, well, if we can't measure empirically, then whatever. And so I think there's this, I use the cell phone analogy, like this is that there's so much development in this space, and the development in this comparative space of psychology, cognitive science, and maybe psychiatry, and this sort of things that mesh with society and the internal stuff, like it's very different and it's hard, and there's reasons why that's the case. And that's when we're dealing with the actual structure of like Cognition Futures and trying to push on that, that's what I don't say what we're up against, but it's more like I don't see it as I don't actually, even though I talk polemically, I don't see it necessarily as we're up against in a competitive sense, but more the playing field. And we kind of had a discussion, I think, before Morgan came in, like, what does success look like for that? Because it is different, and or at least comparing between those like whole arenas is challenging. So
I think I think it was the weapons of math destruction. I forget the author's name, but you know, she talked a lot as well about like algorithms that had, you know, great production teams, but like the metrics were all wrong, and you know, like how easily again you can be you know, led into this. We're making things better with data, and actually making them worse. You know, I think she was talking about like potential for recidivism or like it was algorithms that were used for parole or probation. Anyway, there's lots of good examples in that.
Yeah, and a lot of the ethics stuff comes up in that space, So anyway, absolutely. So let's take a tour, a little bit of a. I think it almost feels outdated, but it's not. But if we look at like these glossaries, I don't even know if there's anything in this one particularly, not really yet. But like here's our old methods project page that hasn't been updated in some time. We had these sort of databases for the annotated bibliography. We had the methods database, which we kind of populated with these terms and ideas that a little bit loosely in there. We've had the two new glossaries. The descriptive glossary is for others and more external, and prescriptive for our take and our forthcoming efforts, which is not a lot there yet, but we kind of flayed it out in this way. We had this sort of task management section, which we haven't really looked at in a while. And, we have this really nice list of driving questions that we haven't talked about in a while either. This task board, I think, is a little, it's partly outdated. It's partly like a bit deep in the weeds, I guess. I think the driving questions was pretty nice because we were getting to a place, we haven't really done this, but just to kind of review, we're getting to a place where we kind of were making these questions that we wanted to center as part of the project. And then, we kind of had this section to tie them to specific projects and ends and aims there. And then these sort of active projects and things we were looking at, which it would be great to maybe dive into more and use more specifically to kind of steer what we're doing ahead. And this list of potential projects, like some of the more subjective experience, methodological barriers within and across cog science subdisciplines, history of paradigm shifts in cognitive science, philosophical commitments to methodologies. These are all like kind of big, broad questions, potential projects projects that would be tied to some of the questions above, and I feel like that's, I could spend we could spend a lot of time here going through these to see if we want to use this framework or not. I think at the very least, I'm going to just kind of take a tour of what we've had and then maybe come back to it after looking at everything and reevaluating at that point. This is an old vision paper idea for this. I feel a little bit bad because this section is quite run down for our notes, but just looking at what it kind of was. We still have our reading group, which I'm thankful for. We still have these databases and these sort of structures and resources we're building out. I don't know if there's much. Yeah, even this methods and visions page is pretty cool. Like we have Amanda's really nicely written up notes about different descriptive and evaluative and prescriptive projects. We have these different steps here, and some of our, we had this discussion on how we use the terms scope, these sort of components to build out these projects, and then also like kind of getting to this, I guess practice. So it looks like develop method candidates and then test method candidates. But we're sort of getting in how do we, maybe like create a practice based off of the project, I suppose.
I was looking at this earlier today. That's why I wrote today and wrote down some notes. And I basically just listed some of the things that are in the database from what we've called the phenomenology excursion. But also regarding the idea of practice in particular, if you click on the 4 facets of methods project page, I think there's a brief description of each of those. And then under practice was a quote that I liked from Thompson. And so that's kind of what I had in mind when I wrote practice as one of these sections.
The problem could be put this way. It's one thing to have a scientific representation of the mind as inactive and the ease and dynamic and rational, as not homuncular and skull-bound, and thus in a certain sense insubstantial. But it's another thing to have a corresponding direct experience of this nature of the minds in one's own first-person case. In more phenomenological terms, it's one thing to have a scientific representation of the mind as participating in the constitution of its internal objects. Is another thing to see such constitution at work in one's own life, one's own lived experiences. So, in this sense of practice, do you seeing it more as is this more related to like a practice as in something applicable for everyday people to do, or like the practice of building out the theory and the research, or somewhere in between?
I guess both. Practice as in one sense, like what we've been calling a first personal practice, or like meditation, a contemplative practice is a phrase people use. So that would be like a daily habit, but the goal of that could potentially be something that aids the theory building, because it's a disciplined introspection and reflection on your own mind. So if it seems like we're in agreement that like cognitive science needs to involve some form of that. There's a lot of wiggle room with what that could look like, how to incorporate subjective experience, but in some form, like some kind of rigorous first personal practice would be useful, necessary maybe. So it could be referring to like just a everyday practice that anyone could do. You're developing the skill of whatever form of introspection or bodily awareness or whatever. But then a certain version of that could aid this theory building. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, it makes me think about like, what was Verla trying to do? I mean, like the whole lineage and the gesture and you know, like cardiophenomenology was sort of a, I forget, did cardiophenomenology involve trying to, I don't remember the details about trying to discern like subjective takes on like your cardio, like your heart rate and your breathing and stuff like that. It wasn't just monitoring heart stuff. It was incorporating, it was trying to incorporate the first person, right? Is that, yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah. And okay, so is that a new page that you made, or is that an older one? I forget.
That was there.
Okay, cool. That's great. I totally forgot that part existed. So it's sort of, yeah, it's a little like creepy. Wow, that's 30 meetings ago that this happened.
It was about the new year last year that we were like, what do we want to do? And we have these notes from a year ago, and I'm glad we're going over them.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because there's like so much good stuff here that like I'm kind of proud to see, even though it's kind of in shambles and notes and inarticulate. It's like, oh, like there's actually stuff to build upon here. So let me go back to this thing. Whoops. I seem to be okay. That's actually all right. Cool. I'll stick here. So let's look at this to make sure we kind of have other things here. I would really like a really nice goal for this year would be kind of getting to a place where I can more formally like conduct some interviews or reach out to people. Not necessarily, maybe interviews is a strong word, but I think a cool marker of progress would be how comfortable and feasible it would be to have like a really functioning interview with questions tailored to some of what we're doing. It'd be really nice to have a nice set of, it could be a formal survey, but also just kind of a standardized set of questions to ask people across some different domains who are dealing with, or subdomains of cognitive science, whatever arena. Kind of say like, hey, like what's your take on this stuff? And there, like present a little bit of our questions and our aims and sort of both sort of in terms of the project's development where we want to go with it, but also regardless of our current I don't know, hopes and aims for what we're trying to do. Like what's their take on it, and what's their sense of, you know, how tenable or feasible would it be to do certain things, and kind of things like that. We've had a number of questions that are somewhere in here or other notes that I have. But yeah, manuscripts and projects, like kudos to Ben for sticking with us for so long and doing things and presenting on it. I think you're showing a lot of leadership in that, and consistently, even just consistently getting to it in the orthogonal mantra or saying from Bradly of, you know, sometimes momentum, maintaining momentum is just as important or more important than progress. So you maintain momentum on that, and I respect that and appreciate that, and I need to meet the same challenges myself. So, and we had a bunch of driving. I guess driving questions is maybe better in this other group. We had the questions are listed elsewhere, but you know, methodological paths. What concepts are worth reconsidering due to methodological problems. The novel technologies things, I think, is kind of where I envision the later half of 2023 to go. And I feel like it's actually perhaps better suited. It's still on the table, but I think there's a little bit more viability for me to steer in that direction now, because I'm actually getting a little bit more, I'm doing a little more technical things now, so I think I'll be a little more literate to do that. We talked about consumer EEG and neurofeedback. We talked about the headbands. We talked about other things.
And I can. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I can definitely speak to those as someone who's been around that stuff for so long now, and it was actually learned something new about. At least low-cost EEG from this one conference. I don't know what you'd call it, panel. That was kind of interesting. At least, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
You can
it was.
say your point. I was just looking at some other stuff. I don't know what this. We talked about this last time, but I forget kind of how it came up. Okay. Anyway, sorry. So I guess for like going back to zooming out and thinking, come back to today, we're kind of I don't know. Do we want to have any like? Do we want to go back and look at any of this stuff right now? I mean, I think it's worth doing, but I kind of wanted to take a big broad view of this whole structure that we had made, and there's also like we can go over the paper pyramid first because there's not really a whole lot to say on this like kind of quirky image, which I kind of love and it's love and cringe together for me. But we, to review the pyramid, we had this big sense of what we wanted to do with sort of foundational things would be survey and review papers, kind of very general fact finding, context finding. Right? Glossary or glossaries, which is sort of this mid layer or like maybe the whole thing, it has to do with these very trying to be intentional about creating the language and I would even say the philosophical and trying to be as precise as we can be about what we're seeing, how we're interpreting other people's stuff, and then eventually how that relates to our things, which I think is, admirable, if not lofty, to do very well. I feel like that would be a lot of talk about, like data management. What about like philosophy management? and like how are you managing your philosophy and the articulateness of your arguments and tying them to context of the people? That's sort of like sounds awesome and like, oh, of course that's what you're supposed to do. And it's like,
in project management, I teach about controlled vocabularies, which is a form of like deciding what terms go where and how they're related, and if they're hierarchies of terms that. So that's something actually that isn't that crazy. It's just kind of we haven't done it.
Well, I think it's the work in and of itself for a lot of this. Like yes, and to do it in this space is like admirable, and should be standard, but yeah. So I'll do this here. Embodied neurophenomenology, 2 theory building papers. What was this one? I don't remember what this one was. Towards neo-cybernetics, which is kind of interesting because it's sort of like dovetailing into the reading group, I think, where that's going to go.
I think Q2 is in reference to the active questions page.
Yeah. Whoops. All over the place. I think it's somewhere around here. Yeah.
At least it's in reference to one past iteration of this page.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Implications of second order cybernetics and phenomenology. Okay, sure. That could be a great like whole paper to write out for sure. And then you could probably put my mind analogies paper in here somewhere. We had a caricature of the pyramid. It was like gather, interpret, posit. And then the top part was something about empirical predictions.
A theory of everything.
Questions. What's that? Sorry.
A theory of everything.
Yeah. Thousands of good studies supporting it. Yes, of course. So I mean, this is a very lofty, but also an attempt to just frame some of the efforts. Okay. So any discussion points we want to mention? Kind of, I do want to go into the lenses again a little bit, but I think that's a little bit more structured. But like we just covered a lot of ground. It's kind of weird. Like I don't know. Like I know it's just like maybe a little awkwardly phenomenological, but like my feelings about seeing all this is both like really cool and excited, and also there's obviously some uneasiness about the state of it and how it's been refined or not, and like and I think what's the difference between this and what I want it to look like, but also just kind of being glad that it exists. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if people have any comments about it or things they want to discuss or look at more. That we kind of, there's a lot of things here, a lot of efforts that were put in this one spot. I feel like, I think some key things on my mind are, it would be nice to think what we want to do about the bibliography and the methods database, the glossaries, I suppose. But it's also really, I don't know, I guess I'll say, I feel, it might be nice to really look at these questions again and think about where we are now, because I feel like there could be a question about there could be questions about like cardiophenomenology, microphenom, the coding as a metaphor paper. Like there's questions that could be made from those things, and it's kind of a sense of you know, making these questions that can arbitrarily, like we could spend a lot of time here, and I don't really want to do that right now, but I also feel like for the moment I'll say, yeah, like there's a lot of questions for the project that we could get at and try to articulate, and almost you know, one way to really dive into the questions again might be to spend some time thinking about the existing, I don't know, several months old questions and new questions we'd like to have, and how does that relate to, you know, our actual efforts? Like what are the things, almost like maybe something akin to what questions and their associated project, if you will, or attempt to make a deliverable or artifact of some kind, what questions, you know, would you invest in or vote for? Something of that nature comes to mind. You know, the sort of pragmatic whatever answer is, you know, well, what can you do? Where can you start? Or if you want to be super agile about it, you can pick what you want to sprint your energy on. But I don't know. I'm curious if I'm not really going to try to push for answers here. I don't really want to have us make choices, because I feel, at least for my sake, I feel quite like, oh, like, ooh, like all this, like meeting an old person you've been talking to in a while. It's like, oh, it's great. Yeah, I can't really interface with that yet, but it's like there's really deep-seated things there that are tender and important. But it's like, okay, let's just have a nice meeting at first before we get too deep in the weeds about it. But I don't know, like, how do people feel about all that? As a side note, this is 6 months ago plus, I think there's something in the area of basal affectivity and like basal cognition, or like the basal cognition events that will find its way into here too. It's sort of like the Levin arc. Yeah.
one theme in this questions list that I'm still interested in is how to bring cybernetics in. And so, I mean, that's why I thought it kind of deserved its own reading group. But that's, and I think as we get further into that, I mean, we already like read a whole book, but that was more focused on like kind of the ethics and the social aspect. But I think as we get into this Levin stuff and memory, there will be kind of intersection between these questions and that.
I think that's a good point. Like a lot of these questions are nice, but I think one of my senses of like project management after 6 months from this time period is more. I think I personally feel like we kind of spent the last year doing a lot of I mean, you could say exploration. I don't think that's really the best word for it. And I have a little resistance to the framing of, oh, we've done so much stuff, now we've got to make these deliverables now. We've got to get outputs, we've got to do this, we've got to grind and have an output and do this. Like it doesn't quite feel like that to me, but it's more I think it's a time for consolidation and like doing the hard work of refining some of this, crystallizing some of the things we want to do. And so I like these questions, and I think it'd be a really fun thing to maybe more like directly revisit them often, or more often revisit some of the questions in terms of what I was saying about relating them to these efforts. But then kind of what I wanted like the half hours of our meetings to be eventually would be, making time to talk specifically about, what thing are we trying to manifest here or invest in or produce. So I think that's some of that's easier said than done, but some of it's also just approach and then doing it as well. So I don't know. I think we all understand that, but I'll just put that that's sort of an intention to do a little bit differently this year. Yeah. And I think what does that concretely mean? Maybe we review. It's a little bit of a choice. Because I feel like there is a choice to be made about, okay, do we just go totally into like embodied neurophenomenology stuff? Do we try to answer, what was question 2, which doesn't only have current backing behind it, but also may because of the reading group that's coming up. I have my mind analogy paper here, which maybe fits in here, but maybe doesn't. Or is the best thing to focus on that would maybe be a little bit more of a unifying item or document would be just, okay, what is the position paper for this group, which is maybe not a maybe is more of an internal document, but might be a little bit more of a centerpiece to build around for the pyramid. I don't know if there's any ideas about that specifically. An open discussion about that. Another way to say it might be, if you had a choice, or if you had a vote, or if you wanted to work on something specifically, what would you want to try to build out into an artifact of sorts?
Well, as one who participated the least in the previous readings, the position paper would be lovely, just because it would help kind of ground me in what you're all thinking. But that would be, that would obviously be somewhat selfish.
I think it's relevant. I think it's relevant to.
Hopefully, it would be useful to others. Yeah.
I think it's relevant. I think it's something that is a limiting factor on people coming in and joining the group too, because there's not really basically all oral history, right now, and a bunch of notes spreading all over the place and recordings. But there's not like here's at my own time I can read it, So I think it's a fair point.
Well, I think having it's almost like a position paper, or like what we're about, is good too. Like, here's what we are kind of advocating for, and sometimes it's just a matter of like saying, this is something that we are trying to develop in this group. This is why we're doing this meeting. This is why we've been doing it for like a year and a half. It gives people an idea of where we are, but like also, it kind of lets us work out the issues. So if we identify some things from the notes and say these are like our 4 top issues that we want to incorporate into CogSci, it stimulates some conversation. We can publish it or post it on a preprint server, and people can, interact with it, because it's hard to interact with the meetings if you're not in them. I mean, at least like if you see one meeting and then see another meeting, it's just hard to synthesize all that.
And I think for our own sake, it would be good to have a position paper of sorts. So we know like on what things we agree and where we might not be so sure of our position. That seems like a useful exercise, even just like the process of it before we share it. And I think a part of that could be what currently exists as the standards of methodological evaluation. So fitting it explicitly into this methods project. One thing that we could have a position on and share are our ideas that some will be more developed than others on what methods in cognitive science are promising or of interest, and what are particularly uninteresting or seem problematic to us. That's maybe would be a good subset of this paper.
Yeah, I like that. And I did like the meta research NL group's position, or their lab's statement of purpose.
Yeah,
that was.
I will.
What was their statement of purpose?
Yeah, can you bring it? Yeah. Read that. We are a research group until Netherlands that does research about research, meta research. But we study the scientific system in psychology and in general to find its flaws and empirically test potential solutions.
Cool.
That's cool, right?
Yeah. Morgan found this. I found it separately, or like.
Well,
yeah, it's cool. It's good. I looked. This is the paper, and then with Whitehurst is the. I looked for him and found this. He's the leader of this group.
Go.
Go. Yeah. Yeah, there he is. Joe. So yeah, and like maybe we investigate this more and get from them, but they're doing very how do they use stats to do this stuff and justify things, errors in statistics, replication, stereotype, and analysis, systemic review. And that's kind of there's some overlap.
The somewhat relevant. Sorry, there's some truck outside. the Kevin Mitchell talk. I think it's titled "Defense Against the Dark Arts." was good. I mean, you know, he speaks to some of the issues that I saw there listed in the meta research. You know, like about pre-registration and p-hacking and you know things like that. Like, it's good.
Excuse me.
Well, he talks about one of my favorite books is this science fictions. It's and Bad Science, you know, the Ben Goldacre book.
So to go back to this, yes, like okay, so position paper, then like let that be the next like thing we try to hit. Like we can talk about some other like things like papers to discuss ratings next time, but I feel like that'll be the thing we leave with next time will be position paper. Like let's try to do it in the next, get a draft of it soon, and maybe in the next few weeks, you know, have something and go from there. And I'll challenge myself to do some of that and report on it, like Saturday meetings too, or whatever. But I think it will. In reality, I think it will really push this forward, but also I think it will be really important for the cybernetic training group and for this. We have this nexus of stuff that's interrelated, and we got to kind of just. I think it'll be really. I like this as a centerpiece for all of those reasons. Okay. We have like 25-ish minutes left. Also, actually, one thing to think about, which may, I don't think it's going to quite work, but I wanted to mention this. This call for proposals again, which isn't really related to our stuff necessarily. I mean, I don't think our position paper is going to dovetail exactly into this, but I feel like I wanted to mention this again in terms of life-mind continuity towards the unified understanding of natural and artificial intelligence. I think we can maybe keep this in mind a little bit as a derivative thing we can, you know, abstract towards. But I don't know. I wanted to mention that as sort of an intermission between everything else. I don't know if we've had any immediate thoughts about this, or just want to table it for later.
Can you scroll down just a little bit on that again? Oh, sorry. I was just reading. I was just trying to remember the. Yeah, that's good.
It's quite a lofty, long introduction, but there's a bunch of questions about world models, functional properties of kind of models. How can models equipped with underlying world models build on physical complex systems? Phenomena, LLM question mandatorily. Characteristic of all life. World models, living systems.
Yeah, I did an outline of what we're talking about Saturday, so I've got that like written down, and maybe we'll revisit this like periodically, so we can get make some progress on it. But we can do that in the Saturday meetings. We don't need to do.
Yeah, you did. I actually really appreciated that. I kind of forgot about it, but I remembering it now, talking about it. So we can revisit that Saturday and go from there. Yeah, thank you for putting this here. I feel like do you want to say anything more?
No, I mean, you know, like it's. I was just thinking about some of those topics, you know, like the idea of the, you know, like can kind of world model trained on data that we have teaches something about the physics of the world, or physics of I forget what they said. In a sense that like, is it yeah. How limiting? I guess the question is like, how limiting is the world model that you've trained, in the sense, and and I was just thinking about like, how can you possibly say something kind of useful about that? But it is leading me back to the deep algebra project from like way back, in terms of a project that came out right after Karpathy's like 2015 paper, and this was like a Polish mathematician presented at like Pi Data Warsaw or something, but it was cool. He was just like, yeah, like let's train a model on all the extant math textbooks, and like basically like let's train Bourbaki-net, right? So Bourbaki is this fictional author of math textbooks, right? That was actually the collected works of multiple mostly French mathematicians, and like, anyway, this would be the equivalent, like, but machine learning version of Bourbaki, right?
Yeah.
And the question was whether this trained model would be able to generate new math, and the nice thing about deep algebra is that well, could you somehow actually prove something in terms of your model's capabilities? The lean, the lean community is one of these theorem solvers, has just released a bunch of talks, and like I said, I had no idea that the Joint Mathematical Society met in San Francisco last week. Kind of super bummed to miss that. Anyway, I'd certainly, yeah. Did you say we're going to talk about that Saturday, Bradley?
Yeah, I would think. Yeah, we could talk about that. I'll bring up the outline too. So we adding some of these notes into the outline, and we'll keep working on it. And we have to submit a abstract, but I would like to, have an outline and things worked out as soon as possible, because the deadlines are pretty tight. So, yeah.
I mean, it's certainly sticking with math versus the systems that are already being generated for science makes more sense. But and there have been some, they're getting, the DeepMind's had some success, I think, with some knot problems, using a I don't want to call it deep algebra, but using a math world model.
Yeah.
Anyway, that would be interesting to follow. And, and I did, the talk that guy gave, like he totally, he was like, this is gonna be a long-term project. We might have to do this for 20 years or something like that.
Right.
Like within 5 years, he's just working for startups now. like no judgment, but I think it would be nice to keep that torch alive.
Yeah. So the other thing I was thinking about was like, if you've seen things before, it's easy to model them. But if there's a lot of what they call out of distribution stuff. That's what they call it in ML. But
Yeah.
this is an idea that, kind of is more general. Like it's just stuff you've never seen before. So like in psychology, they used to use things like geons, which were these weird geometric shapes, and they'd show them to people, and they've never classified them. I think we've talked about that with Boba and Kiki, with where you have these, maybe things that people just kind of assign a name to because they've never seen it before. And so then, what does that mean for a world model? If you gave a model those, kind of those kind of data to look at, what would it do? Would it kind of make that same category attribution that humans do, or would they do something else, or what?
I want to say that there was a Quanta article that was talking about these some strange math categorization, geometric math categorization. Is that what you were talking about, Bradly?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's basically where you have shapes that don't have a name, or it's not something that we're used to naming. So you show it to people and they say, oh, that's not a triangle, not a square. It's just some weird amalgamation of shapes. There's probably a name for it in in geometry, but no one, the people you show it to probably don't know what that is. So they just make up a name or they put it into a category. And so they've used this in categorization in learning theory for years, where they've kind of built these things that are very unusual to most people, and they've had them like classify them and or interact with them as if it's novel. And it's supposed to be like there's no it's supposed to normalize everything. You're not going to make any sort of subconscious decisions about what it is or how to use it. And
this was you'd say that this was more like of a cognitive tool.
Yeah,
for like examining human reasoning.
Yeah.
Then there was an interesting Quanta. I'll try and find it.
It's the one that's called like something about the periodic table of shapes for machine learning.
Maybe, yeah. That it was very, but which makes it sound like it would be, easy, but it was very conceptual, very abstract in some fashion. I forget how. Right. Anyway, we'll look it up.
I think I decided it was beyond me. The type of math I was talking about.
But it again, I think it's the kind of thing that could potentially be useful in the kind of Saffron RFP for thinking about how again, like these models should be able to do things. They should be able to be not just data cameras, like that what's his name was talking about, Mind Blog guy, but like superhuman data cameras, right?
Right.
And again, that was also part of deep algebra. That like, these systems in some fashions, in some ways, are superhuman, and anyway.
Well, superhuman being, I guess. It's something we don't do.
Right. I mean, but like, just in the sense that like the amount of text that they can, quickly absorb and summarize, or put into, there was something about this categorization. I forget it, but it was beyond me too. But you could imagine it being, again, for the computer, it was just operations, right? It was just how you, were searching that space. And anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, that I want to follow up with that ahead. In our last few minutes before we go, one last thing. I don't know if people want to even like try to suggest or discuss things to read for next time because I don't. We can, but I'm gonna try to focus on the paper stuff itself. I was thinking like at a really high level, what do we want the position paper to contain? A little bit of history and background, basic stuff, sure. Positions we might want to take, and then we're taking positions like okay, methods stuff, and then our take on maybe these things about commutation or reductions and what to do with them. Okay, and the lenses we've talked about kind of too specifically. What else? What sort of would be useful?
Maybe the reasons why we spent so long on like Varela and Fuchs, which are similar to each other in interesting ways, just why we found that compelling, and like a short takeaway.
Oh, you mean like why we did it? Like, how does that fit into what we're doing? Or
Yeah, like why each of us were interested in that, in like the first personal aspect, and then the non-reductionism standpoint of Fuchs.
right?
It's like as part of the history, just kind of why we were interested in it in the first place, what we did and why.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that's fair context as to why, not just what we did, but the why.
And you know, after the Brett paper, definitely like to add something about the importance of development in the
Right.
yeah. I'm trying to think how to put where that word should go, but like, you know, like nothing about intelligence can be understood without the lens of development or something like.
Maybe that could fit. One thing that's come up a bit is like what all the E's mean to us. Like when we say we want something to be embodied, what exactly do we mean by that? Because everyone means something different.
Yeah.
I imagine the development line is something like that. Like when we say that cognition is, I don't even know which one that would be, but I think it would be in the spirit of any of them.
I mean,
it's like development environment.
And you can definitely see how like cybernetics would come into that in some ways, in the sense that like it's well, maybe not use that particular word, but self-organization is coming in, and it does seem to parallel, you know, like the physical development being collective intelligence seems to parallel the cognitive development, you know, in some ways.
This has also come up when we've talked about like divergences. So that sounds really abstract, but we've talked about how like when we encounter a theory of the mind, and it has all these components, what are like the dimensions of variation of each of those components? Trying to look at anything that's trying to be like a universal theory of mind and saying, well, it's probably not universal. Where can these things vary by individual?
Okay, yeah. That's okay. That's a really I don't really know if we've done this yet, but that's absolutely a key thing. Is I think we use language for like standard models and then the fringe cases or the marginal stuff, and where's a line between? Is that actually a fringe case, or is it the spectrum has been inarticulately defined? Like that whatever that is, we need to talk about And I don't think we haven't really focused on that outright. Like, I'm not saying it's not part of what we're talking about, but like that's a very specific, I think, application or like theoretical aspiration to push it. Like that's a direction I think, and I want to go in anyway. I'm not saying that this group is to do that, but there's something very particular there that's to be defined more, at least.
And maybe not so much for the position paper, but certainly with the Saffron RFP, just thinking about thinking about that Berkeley professor paper on how large language models speak to Chomsky, but more just thinking about the people applying theories of mind to LLMs. As if that's going to tell you something, like what that's telling you, as well as like how kind of silly that is. And I do think that somehow speaks to the Saffron RFP in terms of like, you can get caught in a loop to nowhere.
Yeah.
But and what, it might be good to see. What's the Pantadosi? I think is the
Piantadosi, I think. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
like it'd be good to look at some of the responses to that article. But knowing the groups that use those theory of mind questions for cognitive development, I've seen these archive papers where it's just like, hey, we're getting this score on theory of mind things. I think, like why would you do that?
Yeah. Well, there's a history.
It would certainly be good to talk about as that relationship to how to understand these models and their relation to our existing our existing knowledge base or knowledge tools.
Yeah, I know they use like theory of mind in animals, and like the tests are really kind of divergent. Let's just say so.
Well, that's but that's a good counter. Saying, because we were just that octopus video that I posted. Again, you don't get. Without putting the octopus in a really odd situation,
right?
You don't get to see how smart the thing is. And so but right, but asking this matrix equation with weights. Theory of mind questions, like what are you trying to you actually getting at? Like you're really probing the data set, right?
Yeah.
Or right, the inherent structure in the data set that you trained on.
Yeah. And theory of mind is more about like, I guess, self-reflection or something. It's not
exactly, right. So it would be, anyway, I do think it fits, maybe not for the position paper, but it fits in with the Saffron RFP.
And it fits into the quote that Jesse grabbed from the machine learning introductory class. Like if
right.
we have so much data, product of our interaction with devices, it's like we can probe that data set, but that's a big difference. That's hugely different than probing reality.
Yeah, it does kind of. It's somewhat like you're using the wrong metrics.
Right.
Like you think you're doing something because like, hey, you know what, my LLM gets a better theory of mind score, you know, as if it's a benchmark.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, which they've done through some sort of, you know, custom prompt engineering, and it doesn't. Yeah.
So it's the human's theory of mind instead of the
Right.
like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, yes, that was whoops. Thanks, Zoom. That good stuff. Any other things you want to add for parts of the paper to think about? I think this is fine just to get stench on this before we go. I think this is really good. I think these things, this whole section was really fun to kind of come about. I think this is actually the most interesting space for me right now is to sort out, categorize this space, because yeah, like we haven't talked about it much, but like everything. Well, I mean this. Where's the bit about development, role of development? Okay, like that was kind of like the core of the 2021 thing, at least for me, because I was like, yeah, we have to put development in here, and that whole space. And interestingly, at the same time, I think Avery's deal was about like autism or neurodivergence too. And it goes into like, I don't know. Let's find a way to talk about the divergence and everything else, and the marginal whatever that stuff. So really cool stuff here. Maybe we can think about future directions stuff next time, or like not even worry about that until we go through this and sort out what we want to do. But let's think about this. I'm going to try to post something of use to this in Slack, and then think about it for next week, and give us that too.
If I could just mention Carmeloff Smith, I posted a few things just about her as it relates to cognitive development and her representational redescription. And so I was just talking about it with somebody interested in joining the group, and it would definitely be worth. Yeah, Carmeloff with a K, and she used to co-author stuff with Andy Clark back in the day. Anyway.
It's a very aspirational thing, and let me see if I can find it, because I don't think I can do it. And if I can't find it in one search, I'm not going to do it. This is a map from a while ago. Well, it's not showing up, unfortunately. But I'll just share this. There's this map of AI safety, which is a big thing in like the effective altruism, AI safety, you know, and it's I can't find the original here, but doesn't matter. It's a map, and it kind of has like all these different people, and you have like one researcher over here or whatever here where they are, and I don't think we're gonna. I don't, you know, and even like in Shimero's book, he has like these diagrams of where people are relative to how, you know, trying to map people out in their positions, and like that's cool. I don't think we want to do that, but I think maybe finding some interesting ways to juxtapose our ideas to other people, and even just our take on what the map might look like. Now that's kind of a reach thing, but I'll just mention that before we go. So anyway, we're over time. But thanks. This is good. I feel good about this. I think this is going to be a worthy thing to attack, and at least try to manifest in the year and kind of get it going. So
are we reading something for tomorrow?
Oh, for Cybernetics group.
Oh, yeah. We have a lot of candidates.
Do you want to make an executive
Just throw a
decision?
dart. Yeah.
How about I do tomorrow morning?
Okay.
I haven't actually looked at the papers that were in that screenshot, just the titles. So I should look how long they are. And I'll pick one.
Good deal.
Okay.
Good deal.
Cool stuff. Thanks everybody, and we'll check the Slack and talk tomorrow for the thing.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.